So this presentation is about German new medicine, and I was trained in a hybrid kind of science called meta medicine. It's now called meta health. They've rebranded it, and there's a little bit of a story in it as to why it has to be rebranded, and it's to do with propaganda, interestingly. So what I've tied this into, because yoga is generally the lens through which I learn, work and teach. And so as often as I can, I try to tie the strands back to yogic teaching. And so I wanted to present this presentation as something to do with Dharma, because it's about natural laws. So it's about the 5 biological laws, which are 5 natural laws. And so this is the beginning of a Dharma presentation that I do in our community. So when your soul descends into your body, it has its reason for doing so. And this reason is your Dharma, it's your duty, and we call it your why, because the business I run is called Find Your Why. So the why is purpose, it's duty, it's passion, it's Dharma. So that's how I tie it into the Dharmic principles of yoga. And as I say, it's about natural law. These are all laws of the universe that we're working through. So these are not man-made laws. These are principles that are held throughout all of our existence, throughout all of our humanity, if you like, our society and our societal structures. And so with the Find Your Why Foundation, what we ask people to really delve into is, why are you here? What is your life purpose? What's the soul's purpose for incarnating? And to incarnate means to come into the meat. And so what is the meat showing us? Because this is where the biology then beautifully links back into the universal laws. So you'll all have a set of the slides. I will set them through. So I'm not going to read every single slide, because some of them I'd like you to read afterwards if you're up for it, just because I want to get into the juice of the content. So let me see. I'm just missing half a slide because of this. So the guy that developed what I learned was a guy called Dr. Hammer, and he developed this after learning about the model that was put together by Penfield. So this is all the background to it. I'm not going into the background, but the reason Hammer got interested in this was because of the loss of his 17-year-old son, Dirk. And Dirk died in 1979, and he was actually shot and died while he was on holiday in Italy. And Dr. Hammer was in Germany. That was where they lived. And he found out about the death of his son. And then he developed, a few months later, he developed testicular cancer. And he knew the cancer was because of the shock of the death of his son. He just knew. And so he then has gone into the depths of what is now German new medicine and meta-medicine to understand and comprehend how this process took place and what is it all about. So I came across his work because I've been diagnosed with 2 so-called incurable autoimmune conditions, and medicine didn't make sense. General physical medicine did not make any sense, and my second condition appeared to be a result of an overdose of medication. So it made even less sense to me that I should follow the general medical constructs. So this was how I got into this work. And what Hammer's done is he's mapped out that the brain and the embryological systems are working together in a way that has never really been fully integrated into or understood by the current medical paradigm. And this is an area that people are now learning more and more about. So it's just a really lovely science that continues to develop and grow, as I think all sciences should. So this is Dr. Hammer, and this is his beautiful son, who is the origins, if you like, of the story that I know behind this brilliant knowledge, this brilliant wisdom that I'm going to share with you today. So his Dharma, this is how I see the Dharma. Dr. Hammer's Dharma is about the 5 biological laws and the presentation of German new medicine as a science to help humanity. And so what he's done is he's correlated how health and the brilliant natural intelligence of the body interact. And that presents as symptoms. When there's something that needs to be looked at, it's presenting as symptoms, which we then label as disease. And what this also helps us to understand is this beautiful correlation between what we've in our Western science have separated into biology, psychology, physiology, chemistry, physics, all of these ologies and things. There's one universe that we live in. It's not separate sciences. They're not separate things. It's all one part of, the major system that we've broken down it to understand it, but we can't break the system down and look at it in reality. We only can do that to learn. When it comes to how things function, it's all interacting all of the time. So we're looking at the body as a biopsychosocial system. So we're looking at the biology, the physical cellular activity, if you like. We're looking at the psychology, the way that the brain is working and the brain interacts with the body. And we're looking at the sociology, the way that we interact, the way our sense of ourself, what's it called? Not objective. What's the opposite of subjective? So the subjective sense of me in this world and how I relate. So how do all of those three things interplay to help us to understand these natural laws? So the first thing that we're going to look at is, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to go on because I've just realised there are extra slides. So we're going to look at what begins the symptom process. And this is a beautiful illustration of the thing that's at the origin of a symptom process. And this is a biological shock. This is an example, a brilliant example of a biological shock. So you can see that poor little primate, what a state it is in. And this is what happens to us when we receive shocks. This is what is happening on many levels, and sometimes it's really strong like this, and sometimes it's just something subtle where you want to shake the person who's not listening to you because it doesn't make sense to you. When we're shocked by something that we don't understand what's going on, this is the origin of the whole process. So this is where the 5 laws begin. So the first biological law is all about how the shock process develops the symptom cycle. And so how these two parts interact. So a shock, every significant evolution, because this is the beauty of this, is it shows us how symptoms and disease are actually part of the human evolution. So every significant evolutionary biological special program, you'll get to understand a bit more about what that actually means, is originating in a shock and a traumatic experience. And there are 4 key elements to a trauma that will always result in a symptom, a biological symptom. So the trauma has to be an unexpected event, a dramatic event, an event that sort of shuts you off from everything else. So it shifts your sense of your consciousness, your state of consciousness, so that it's like nothing else is present with you or available to you. So you're isolated, totally isolated as a being. And that you have absolutely no strategy to deal with this shock. So as you can see, the previous slide is a great example of what I'm going to refer to as a UDIN. So the UDIN is the shock. And the shock immediately then has this cascade of events that precipitates in symptoms or disease, as we have been told to label it. And the shock impacts the biology, the psychology, and the sociology all at the same time. It's an instantaneous, absolutely in this moment, all of it fits together in this one moment. So this is the first law. Now, this is quite complex, this first law, so I'm going to break it down a little bit more for you, and then we'll go through the other 4, because if you don't really get this, the other 4 don't make so much sense. So I wanted to really, this is the one that we're going to delve into the deepest. So when we look at the biopsychosocial being that we are, then we can look at how these different levels, we can start to separate them out to begin to understand them. So the hammer focus is that moment of shock. It's where the instant in which all of this cascade then falls out from. And so as soon as this shock moment occurs, at the level of the brain, which is the biology, Oh no, hang on. So I've just, I have to do these the other way around. These have been described in reverse order. So I'm going to go over to the social side first, because the shock is usually something happening outside of us. So the yellow thing I'm going to look at first is your subjective experience at the moment of the shock. And so in your subjective experience, this is looking at how is your mind perceiving that moment of that situation. That everybody perceives it differently because we're all unique individuals, that there are so many subconscious and subliminal pieces of information that are part of my subjective experience that are present in that one moment, and that all of this information actually began when I was a fetus or began when you were a fetus. So how this social event and shock is impacting me, you can look at it, you can break it down into those areas. So the next thing we look at is the brain, and how the brain and the mind then comes into the this first law. And so again, at the moment of the shock, of the Udin, so at the moment when it's unexpected, it's dramatic, it's isolating, and there's no strategy, at that very same moment, the shock creates a little shock wave in your brain. This is dependent upon your perception. So it'll create a little shock wave in your brain. And at the time it creates that shock wave in your brain, exactly that same moment, that shock wave is in the body and it affects a specific set of biology. So then we move to the organs. So there is this perceived idea, there's this actual physical shock wave in the brain, and there is a biological component that all happen at the same time. And when we look at the biology, what can happen with the biology is it can either create a growth or a tumor process, or which is a tissue plus process, or it can affect the function of a tissue to reduce the tissue growth, so you get ulceration where tissue isn't growing anymore, or the function of the tissue just stops happening. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is the first part of the process of understanding the social psycho-bio part of the whole process. Okay, and so when we look at the types of shock and how they affect us, there's 3 different categories of shocks that we look at. So there's a real survival shock. So this is where you're going to starve, or this is where the tribe are going to kill you. So this existential criticism is one of the things that we're struggling with at the moment. Because how can, as you said, Jenny, how can people not be upset when you tell them 10 people's grannies just died after the jab? How is that not disturbing people? This to me is like, they say, well, you need the jab because you're going to kill me. This is this existential criticism, this existential conflict happening. And this is really happening deeply for all of us at the moment. There are a few other words on here that I just wanted to pick up on. Being too slow to actually survive. So with an example of that primate, if that primate was quick enough and jumped far enough and moved quickly enough, it would have saved its own life. So if there's a perception that we can't do that, that is a huge shock for us. That will, again, leave this massive shock shadow through the being. So all of the survival ones are at a really, really base level of survival. This is where it impacts like the lizard brain, if you like. It's like even the lizard brain wouldn't survive under these circumstances if they're pushed to their full extent. Then the next level of shock that we can have can be a sensorial shock. So how are we feeling? So we can get a shock at that level of the feeling. So you can feel like the nest is how you feel in your home, how you feel in your territory. So worrying about your home or your territory or your nest is it's a survival threat, but it's a level of sensation, sensorial survival. There's this feeling of disfigurement, there's feeling soiled or disgusting, feeling attacked or violated, or just a basic self-devaluation. That's got a D missing, I've just realised. Self-devaluation, that I feel I'm not enough. These are all other types of shocks that we can have on this second level of my being. So the first one is to do with the basic level of can I continue to live and breathe? This is, can I feel safe enough to exist and survive? And then at the third one, can I communicate in a way that means I'm safe enough to survive? So they are all about basic survival, but there are different levels of our perception and different levels of our being. So the final one is our social interactions. And again, this is massively heightened at the moment. So am I being separated? Am I really fearful? Am I full of anger? Sexually, am I powerless? So with Dr. Hammer, what happened with him was it was to do with existential and sexuality. So his was a survival tissue growth, which was the tumor in the testes. And his way of understanding it was that his testicular function was trying to do what it could to make a new baby. And that resulted in a testicular growth. Because the function was going, we need to make, because it needed to make the new baby, because the baby had gone, his boy had gone, his child had left, his protege had been taken. So his body went into this biological shock of, shit, we need to make a new one, we need to make a new baby. And so the testicular tissue grew, and the function was trying to go into overdrive to make a new child, if you like. So the brilliant intelligence of the biology, once we get the mind to understand that brilliant intelligence of the body, this science, this way of looking at our health is it's phenomenal. I love it. And so these are the 3 levels at which we can get shocks. So it can be our deepest level of survival. It can be a sensation of how do I feel as a human, and it can be interactive and social. How do I act in the world and give and receive in this world? Okay, so the first law, as we've said, is at the moment of the shock, the UDIN is unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and no strategy. At that moment, it will impact the perception of who I am in the world. It will impact my brain tissue. I'm going to show you some amazing pictures in a minute. And it will impact the function of the cellular information in some organ in my body, all at the same time. So that's what this is all talking about, and how it's different for every one of us, because the way we perceive ourselves and our state of consciousness is unique to each of us. So we're all individual on that level. So that's how we can have 2 people can have the same accident and they both come out of it with totally different symptoms, because we've all got our own perceptual view of the world. And so this is an example of that. So somebody who's just undergoing a divorce, it could be, 10 people are undergoing a divorce and they come out of it with different disease processes happening because they haven't resolved the conflict, the shocks and the conflicts. Then you can end up with things like breast cancer, which is a separation conflict. So that would be breast duct tissue. There's also breast, there's 2 different types, isn't there? There's ductal, and then there's the breast tissue that actually produces milk, because the ducts actually carry it. And they're very different types of cancer, and they're very different types of conflict shock that stimulate those 2 disease processes in the body. If people feel abandoned by things, then you get a kidney collecting tubule, and that often leads to edema or inflammation. So I know I'm running a lot of that because of a situation that I've got around my eyes and the amount of inflammation that happens there. So this kidney collecting tubule abandonment conflict is quite common for us. And it's almost as if I've been left in the desert. This is how my body interprets it. I've been left alone in the desert. There's no water and I might die. So I need to hang on to every last drop of liquid in order to continue to survive. And until I can resolve the conflict of the idea of abandonment or isolation, my body's going to continue to hold on to water. And I know that this is true because specific times when I've resolved a perceptual process of mine, I go to the toilet and I wee for an hour. You just wee. I don't know if any of you have ever had that, when you've had a healing process and you just wee and wee. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you don't wee because you've actually instigated another process. So there's all these lovely biological mechanisms that show themselves to us. And when we understand what they mean, when we comprehend what it's telling us, then we can use this knowledge and this wisdom to really help to resolve and heal what's happened to us. Coronary arteries have a lot of anger around them. So whenever there's high blood pressure or other things that affect the arteries, especially around the coronary area, that will be to do with anger and conflict. And generally it's territorial as well. There's something to do with loss of territory. The liver, the parenchyma of the liver, the actual meat of the liver, not the ducts, not the tubes, the actual meat itself that does the detox functioning, that's prone to conflict shocks around starvation. And that becomes starvation of love, of money, of goodies, of food, of information. But the idea of the the perceived idea of starvation will impact the liver. And it all depends on how you see the world. So we're all different. We all have the same shock and different symptoms. So this is, again, this first biological law is understanding how the shock, the perceived way of being in the world, there's tissue in the brain that gets impacted, and the actual tissues in organs get impacted. This is the law. This is the first law, that these three things all go hand in hand, and the process begins in an instant when the shock occurs. Okay. And then it's looking at how do people struggle, how do people get so shocked? And then there's this whole thing about tracks and triggers, which is about half a day's training. So I'm not going to go there right now. So this is what happens in the brain. So these are CT scans. So you see the top right is showing you a red line through the brain. There's various lines that I'm showing you here. That is a slice of brain that is taken by a CT scan. And so that red line would go all the way up to the top of the head. And each line, you get an image like the three images below on the screen. So anybody who knows anything about CT scans, you could probably tell me at which level each of these three layers is at. But what I want you to notice is that there are rings, and they're like shock waves. And each of these three has got its shockwave rings. So the first one has got two. It's got one, if it's a clock face, there's one at about 2 o'clock. That's a smaller one, just by that red arrow. And then there's one here, which is at like 7 or 8 o'clock, which is huge and goes all the way across the center. Now, these are actually visible on the CT scan. So if you look at CT scans, you will see these rings, and these rings indicate where a biological shock has taken place. And the first two, so the blue one on the left and the center one, these are actively in shock. And I'm going to go on to the second law, which looks at whether things are active or they're gone into resolution. So the first two pictures show us an active shock wave. So I don't know if you can see in that second one, the shock wave's at about 5 o'clock, but it's got so many rings around it. It's an incredibly powerful shock wave that's happened through the brain there. And then on the third image over on the right, you can see at about 1 or 2 o'clock, you can see a white ring, and it's actually calcified. So during the healing process, there's a calcification that happens that is healing the shockwave. And so these, as I say, there's one of the guys that I studied with who's another German doctor actually, and this is his area of, I mean, he can look at a brain CT scan and oh my goodness, he can tell you your life story. It is incredible because he can see how long the shockwave has been there for, whether it's active or not, whether it's healed or not, when it was activated, how long it lasted before it was healed, and when it was healed. And he can date them and name them. He can tell you which tissue it's in, tell you where it is in the body, if it's on the left side or the right. It's just incredible. The amount of knowledge that you can gain from these pieces of information when you understand what you're looking at is just incredible. So we call these brain relays because this is the psychological shock, the perceived shock has happened. And at that moment, this process began in the brain. And at the same moment, the information was being transmitted into the cellular components that relate to these areas in the brain. So again, this is a huge, huge vat of information that we really can't go into because I'll be here for weeks. So the conflict phase is where the shock is still active and it's not been resolved yet. And the regeneration phase means that the body is beginning the healing process. It's come out of the shock phase and into the healing process. So this is just another way of understanding this first law, because it is really dense with information. And I was looking at how can I keep it as simple as possible, but, you know, let you really get to the juice of this subject, because it really is very, very juicy stuff. So there's a couple of different types of shocks. So a self-devaluation shock will go into, which is I'm not good enough, I'm not clever enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not tall enough, whatever I am not enough of. that type of a shock will go into the cerebral medulla part of the brain. So when you take the slices, you see the shock wave centered in the cerebral medulla part of the brain. And that particular type of a process will go into the bones. That's one of the tissues that will be impacted by a self-devaluation conflict. So the conflict is I'm not good enough. It'll hit my cerebral medulla and make a shock wave, and it'll hit my bone tissue. And again, depending on where it is in the cerebral medulla, we can tell you exactly which bone, exactly which type of cell in the bone, everything, where this process is, where this disease process is actually taking place. If you have a loss conflict, so the self-devaluation is about my interaction with others in the outside world. Then with the loss, this is the feeling, I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel enough, or I don't feel, I feel like I'm either devalued or I feel insignificant. So it's not a devaluation as an interactive measurement. This is an inner feeling process now. So this is the white one in the middle. So this is the loss conflict. And that loss conflict is the sort of conflict that would go through a different part of the cerebral medulla. And that would go into the ovaries. This is about nesting and about reproduction and families and stuff. So, but it's feeling, it's from a feeling sense. And then if we've got the worry, it would be a process that would hit the cerebellum when you look at those shock waves in the brain. And that could affect the breast gland. So the worry and argument conflicts get glandular tissues, but we looked before at the nest, the disrupted nest, and that gets the breast duct. So again, we can look at what type of conflict it is, where it's affecting the brain, and what the tissue is in the body that's being impacted by that. And when we can help a client or a patient or myself to understand how to link these two things, then I can start to really get into my subjective experiences, because that's where I can heal. That's what I can change. That's where the work happens. So that's the first law. So the sort of language that I listen to when I'm working with a client, these are the sort, and this is what you were all talking about before. I was going, oh my God, I wonder if it's on the list. So the sorts of shocks that we're undergoing at the moment. So it hit me like a hammer in the stomach. I know Brigitte was saying it makes me feel sick to my stomach. So I caught my breath. I couldn't breathe. The words just keep getting stuck in my throat. Something feels really heavy in my stomach. Sometimes mine goes like a washing machine. I've got the washing machine in my stomach going on as well. I can't digest it. I can't take it in is another common thing that we hear. It broke my heart. There's a lot of that happening at the moment. I was paralyzed by the fear, or I'm green with envy. I don't know who would say blue, but anyway, I'm green with envy is another one. And these are all signals of my perception and also a felt sense of my experience. So these signals can be real keys into the disease process as well, and what we need to heal it. Okay, so now we're going to move. So that's the first biological law. It's quite dense, that one, isn't it? So I'll just stop for a minute, actually. Is there any questions about that first set of information? Because again, as a law, what I want you to understand is that there's a shock and there's this level of cascade of events that happen as a result of that shock. So there's this perception shift or consciousness shift, then there's the brain tissue little explosion that happens, and there's also a biological mechanism that will functionally be adapted as a result of that shock. So is that making sense for everybody? Okay. I know I get a bit lost in it. I love it so much. Okay. So the second law, once we understand that first law, the second law now talks about this two phases. So this is where sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system come into play. So this is a really basic construct, just to understand the concept behind this second law. So the second law is at the beginning of the red dot. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'm wriggling it around. The beginning of the red dot. So life's going along. Life's going along. Normal little curve, it's normal life going along, and suddenly, bop, there's been a big shock and you go up into the red phase. So up in the red phase, we have running compulsive thoughts running. We generally are a bit numb to things because it's almost like a shell has come around us sometimes that happens. This is where we were saying about the spirit becomes a bit disembodied. That's what can happen in this phase. So this is where the body's gone into this big shock phase. It's very, very stressed. It's very activated. There's a lot of sympathetic nervous system going on. So there's all this rescue, emergency happening. And so we're in this phase. And as long as we are in this, as much red colouring as there is on this particular graph for your process, you have to have an equal amount of blue to recover and repair completely. And this is where I made one of my notes, because this is where, when you get angry, you need to scream and shout and let it all out. If you want to shake someone, it's probably a better idea to do it to a cushion, but shake it, shake the cushion. If you need to scream, scream. I mean, sometimes I will scream into a cushion as well, because I don't want to disturb the people around me, but my body needs to do it. So this is where we have to learn to express what the body's given us access to in the moment. So that was, yeah, when you said that about, you know, you need to learn, I was like, yes, of course we do, because otherwise we get stuck in red. And we end up in red, the body just end up going into collapse because it can't support that level of activation. Because while we're in red, the body's not doing any healing or the specific train of information. There's no healing going on. It's activated. It's activated into fight or flight, or it's stuck in freeze. It's stuck on survival. There's no nutritional loveliness. There's no calming. There's no nurturing. There's none of that stuff happening while the body is on this red alert. And so when we've got a phase that's gone into red, we need to find the resolution to bring it down into the blue. And in the blue is where the regeneration happens. Now, often the blue phase is where we get symptoms. It's where we get inflammation, because the inflammation is the juice, is the soup, is the medicine that the body makes to help repair and heal. So blue is all about repairing and healing. It can knock you out completely. It can put you into the real deep parasympathetic processes of regeneration. It's not parasympathetic shock. Parasympathetic shock, from what Juliet talks about in trauma, that lives in the red phase, actually. This is true parasympathetic. This is really healing. This is not trying to heal around a ball of fire. This is deep healing. And so this is now where the conflict, the whole, the shockwave in the brain, this is where it starts to actually go through the calcification process. In the blue phase, you get lots of things like cramping, because the cramping is the squeezing out of the old shit that you want to get rid of, so that then the body can relax and let the nutrients and the absorption of fresh, clean juiciness come back in, so that things can get back into flow. And if you've completely cleared all the triggers that created the initial shock, you will complete a cycle like this. This is ideal. This isn't real. This is ideal. It's not real. This is not whatever really happens. Well, it does in some cases. So, for example, the red phase could be a juicy piece of lemon, and it sends my salivary glands into active mode, and then I eat it. And then the body goes, oh, we've eaten that, and now we can rest and repair and come out. So it's actually a normal biological cycle of every activity and every function in every piece of your biology. But what we're talking about today is specifically where we look at symptoms that are seen as disease. That's why I wanted to, but it is normal for us to go up and down, but just not huge and stuck there. So a thing that adds a little bit more detail to this is the next one, where we start to look at, and it's got some nice numbers on, so it's easier for me to talk about. We can start to look at what's happening here. So normal, healthy, everyday, ups and downs, you know. The ups and downs could be the salivary glands, it could be your heart beating, it could be the work of the kidneys, it could be the digestive. Everything has its phases. So you use the tissue, and then the tissue goes into repair. And you use the tissue, and then the tissue goes into repair. So this is normal. But when we've got, as I say, when we've got a big shock, a biological conflict shock, that then goes on to create a disease process. And because he started his work around cancer, and it's also very typical for autoimmune diseases as well. So this is the areas that I usually am able to apply this to. So we can see that these two phases of the disease cycle are really, really clear. But this idealistic image of the two pieces like this is very, very idealistic. You know, normally you'll get a big red one and then a bit of a blue and it goes back to red, and a bit of a blue and it goes back to red. Or sometimes you get stuck in blue and it'll get a really big red but quick. So you can see here there's a thing called a healing crisis. Number 6 is a healing crisis. So 2 is the shock, 3 is activated, 4 is the healing, or the resolution, actually, not the healing, is the resolution of the shock. So, for example, 4 would have been when that primate found safety that we saw on the very first photograph, yeah? So where the chimp or the whatever it was, the monkey, whatever it was, the shock is number 2. Number 3 is leg it, get to safety. And number 4 is now I'm safe and there's no leopard chasing me. And so now what happens, he has a really big sleep. He'd probably go and so at number 6, he's popping his head out of his safety hole to make sure that the leopard is not around. And guess what you're doing when you're popping your head out of the safety hole? You're shitting yourself again. You're like, oh my God, is the leopard there? So you go back into the shock for a moment. But if there's no leopard there, you go, oh, great, now life can go back to normal. So between 4 and 5 is where you get loads and loads of symptoms, because that's the deepest level of repair. But then from 6 to 7, that's where things start to generally we start feeling, oh, I'm feeling like my old self again. Oh, I'm starting to feel like I've got a bit more, I'm feeling a bit more normal and stuff. So the end, the what's it called? Restitutive is the, that's where we're restoring back. So it's not cleaning up the mess anymore, because between 4 and 5 is really cleaning up the mess that was made. But between 6 and 7 is where we're just now restoring to get back to normal. So hopefully that makes sense of the 2 phases. And as I say, these are ideal shapes. These are not real shapes. But what we always find is when there is complete normal restoration of full health, which is what number 7 is showing, that the number of the amount of red and the amount of blue are the same. So it means if you've had symptoms for a long time, you need to give your body a long time to repair. So it just shows the balance, you know, the yin and the yang, and we need to balance everything. I do parts therapy a lot. I love the internal family systems. I love working with constellations and all of this good stuff. And these are actually, this is just a little bit of an understanding of this is where parts get created. These processes that we go through, these biological conflict shocks, also create parts in our personalities. And these parts are the things that we're having conflict with in other people. Because the parts that are activated in the people that we just don't bloody understand are real personality parts. They're really deep parts of their personality, their identity. You know what? There's stories about when people have multiple personality disorder, and one personality will have green eyes, and another personality will have blue eyes, and they'll have a different tone of voice, and there are so many differences, and one part doesn't know the other part. These parts, and this is also part of mind control, isn't it? It's the trauma that they put onto the mind control. The poor people who've struggled with that. I've got multiple shattered personalities, and this again is an explanation of that process too. So I just wanted to put that in there, because that again for me is fascinating, and this is the level that I generally work with clients. I love parts. It's my favourite thing. So now we're moving on to, so number 2 is that there are 2 phases, equal phases, yin and yang, in each of the disease processes. So now we're looking at number 3. So number 3 is we're going to apply it to embryology. And when we're looking at embryology, we're looking at the correlation again between the psyche, the brain, and the organs. So it's the biopsychosocial, or the social psychobio, as it's named there. And how all of that is part of the human evolution. How can we see it as an evolutionary process? So I'm not going to go into that, because again, it's too much information. So what we know is from the germ layers, from embryology, the germ layers are really a really important part of how the body develops, how the mind develops, how the tissues develop, how our behavior develops. So we've got the outer layer, which is our social. The biopsychosocial is the outer layer, or the endoderm, I think it's called, isn't it? And the layer of tissues that develop as part of the endodermal process in embryology are all linked. So if you get the shock wave in that part of the brain, it will link to that part of the body as well. So there's this embryonic mirroring, if you like, through the tissue and the shock wave in the brain and the perception, because we learn to perceive at different ages. So our perceptual development is easy to plot in a timeline. And so is the brain development, and so is the body development. And these are core to understanding the behavior of symptoms, the behavior of disease, and what the origins of that particular behavior are. So that is the third biological law. So that's making sure that you all understand that these layers are really, really key. Oh, also, when I talked about the different types of shock before, so the survival shock, the deep base survival shock would be at the yellow part. That's brain sense stuff. It's to do with the lizard brain. It's to do with our deepest sense of survival. And it affects tissues like the meat of the liver would be a yellow layer. What else is the thyroid is the actual glandular tissue is yellow. But then the duct, which is about the communication, is the orange layers. And then when we look at the red layer, this is to do with our interaction. So it would be our skin or our organs of perception are in the red layer. So again, just understanding that all of these layers, and they indicate to us what is the symptom saying. Because the science, this whole science to me, is decoding the language of symptoms. It's really, really a deep decode of the language of a symptom. So if you've got eczema running, you know it's red. If you've got a liver, what's the word? Not duct. I keep forgetting that word. The meat of the liver, anyway. If the meat of the liver is affected, you know it's yellow. So it's like when we can see what the symptom is, then we can start to really understand where do we need to look? Where do we start getting our microscope out and go looking? Okay. So it shines the light on the area that we need to investigate more. So the fourth biological law is so interesting at the moment because this is microbes. I'm assuming that we all know that a lot of the DNA that's walking around with us isn't human. A lot of the weight of my body is non-human. It is viral, it is bacterial, it is fungal. It's not human, but I couldn't exist without it. It's part of my organism. I am what is it? Bruce Lipton says, I'm a skin-wrapped environment with 30 trillion cells or something. But some of those cells aren't human, but they're part of me. So it's like the thing that I am is not just human. I'm all of these different things. And so how do they interact? What roles do they play in what we're looking at here? And again, what Dr. Hammer did was he saw how each of the layers from the embryology and each of the different types of microbes and microorganisms interact and what the story is there. So I love this. So the brain stem has got fungi and different microbacteria, and what they are is they are good at destruction. So there's a link with the brain stem is like they're going to go and break things down. That's what these specific organisms do the best. That they're best at breaking things down. With the cerebellum, you've got cleaning up happening. With the cerebral medulla, you've got things that go and fill in the gaps. And then with the cerebral cortex, which is the outside, is the reconstruction crew. So we can look at each of them with this really lovely, sophisticated understanding of where they fit into the health system and what roles they play. One of the stories from this that I want to show you, just so that you can get a bit of an idea in your mind of what this even means. Tuberculosis is one of the destruct organisms. When we can't take life in, when life is too much to take in, the lung, that's our perception, the lung tissue will be affected. It's like I can't take in the breath, I can't take in life. So the lung tissue will be affected. And if I can't take life in, if I'm so shocked I can't take life in, the lung tissue is going to go, make more lungs tissue, make more lungs tissue, make more, so we can breathe, we need to breathe, make more tissue, make more tissue. And then when the shock goes away, the tuberculosis comes in and it goes, right, too much tissue, let's eat it. Let's eat all the too much tissue. And what happens when people have had a BCG injection and they have no access to their natural levels of tuberculosis, there's nothing to eat the tumours. And so the body magically encapsulates tumours. And there's been work done on cadavers, there's been work done on dead bodies, where they find encapsulated tumours in lungs. And there's a correlation between people who've had the BCG or whatever the injection is that stops the tuberculosis. So if you've stopped the tuberculosis, your body still has the intelligence to go and encapsulate that lung tissue that had been created if you'd gone into a shock where you needed to make more lung tissue because you overdid it. And then when you go into the blue, there's nothing to clean it up because it's been injected out of you, if you like. But the body then has found a way. So that this is where human evolution actually is at play again. So even though we're getting injections or jabs or things that are impacting the biology, the brilliant, intelligent biology, the biology is so intelligent, it can still do a great job. So that's one of the examples of what these different microorganisms do when they're playing their role in the nature of the being that I walk around in this meat suit. Okay. And then, here, so this is another one that I liked. So the diseases are not contagious. This is absolutely one of the fundamental parts of the meta medicine and the German new medicine. It's like with the terrain theory. I think it really follows closely with terrain theory. Diseases are not contagious. What is contagious is our beliefs, our values, our behaviors, the things that our mirror neurons help us to do, the things that our need for community and socialization create within us. The beauty of NLP and the understanding of what NLP is about, how we are programmed by language because we are social creatures. So this is what's contagious, not disease. The disease is the result of the contagion of behaviors and beliefs and all of that stuff. Bacteria and fungus optimize healing phases. So that's what I was just talking about with the cleanup of tuberculosis. So the microbiome, again, so this is Jenny's world. This is one of the things that I love about Jenny because she understands this at a whole level. I've got no idea. And so understanding what's going on inside that gut of mine, between my mouth and my bum, there's an awful lot going on. And if I don't understand it and I try and fix it, I'm going to mess it up. So, so that, again, that's another part of our beautiful, intelligent body that we've unlearned the intelligence of it. And then this is where it talks about the encapsulation of tumours as well. So what I was saying about this is not just happening in the lungs, by the way. There's tumours all over the body that can get encapsulated. And it's generally because we've done something to impact the bacteria that would normally come in and clean up the tumour. And remember, the tumour is the body's way of making more tissue to increase the function of something that I perceive I'm not doing enough of, or I'm not doing properly. So again, the perception is running the show. So that's where I can start to do the healing work. That's where I can make the biggest changes for myself. And then the fifth biological law. The fifth biological law is the summary of all of this, the super intelligence of this body, and how every time we go through a conflict shock, a resolution, and we come back to healing and whole, we have adapted. We have adapted. So the next time that shock happens, we no longer have the Udin possible. So it won't be unexpected because it's happened before. It won't be dramatic because it's happened before and we got over it. We won't feel isolated because we knew what to do last time. And we won't have no strategy because we've already sorted it out. So we can never be shocked by the same event happening again. We can never be shocked in the same way. If we've gone through the whole of the activation cycle and the whole of the healing cycle, we've evolved to cope with whatever the initial shock was. We can now tolerate it in a way that we were never able to tolerate it before. And so we have evolved as a being. And so that is about the super intelligent body. And the fact that it never makes a mistake. Our perception is full of mistakes. The body is never making mistakes. Sadly, it's informed by the stupidity of our perception. And that's where the mistakes are. And so Understanding that this evolution is happening over millions of years, well, that depends on what kind of theories you follow, doesn't it? If you're into Terence McKenna, you might have a different story on that one. And just that this sacred medicine is life itself, and how our body and our mind and our psyches interact. That is the sacred medicine, just being, the being human, and having this brilliant biological journey. So each disease is a meaningful and intelligent process, because the disease is the body's way of adapting to a shock. That's all it is. So when we become aware of the conflict and the emotions, and we transform them through forgiveness, through letting go, through love, through consciousness, through shifting our states of consciousness, then we are essential, and that we are essential aspects of every healing, our personal growth and our evolution. The whole of life is our evolution. So what is your biology showing you? It's my final question.